All right, moving right along here in Gravity's Rainbow. This video will discuss episodes 3 and 4 together because 3 is really short. It's only like 3 pages. And episode 3 then gets back to Teddy Bloat. And Teddy Bloat is on his way to the offices of Achtung, which of course in German means attention. But here, Achtung stands for Allied Clearinghouse Technical Units, Northern Germany. And it's the operation that Tyrone Slothrop works for, as well as his colleague or friend, Mucker Maffick, Tantivy Mucker Maffick. They have desks at right angles to each other. So Bloat is going in, and we get a glimpse into Bloat's bag, the thing that he's carrying. And there's a bunch of things in there. And then there are twin silver hairbrushes, each in the shape of the flaming chef sword. Capital S, capital H, A, E, F, all capitalized. SHAFE stands for the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force. And if you look up on Google image search, their badge is in the shape of a flaming sword. And we think there of the flaming sword that was put after Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden. A flaming sword was put there so they would not go back in. So it's associated with fallenness. But then above the flaming sword, on that patch, is a rainbow. So we get the rainbow. And then it's going to occur again here. As Teddy Bloat goes into the offices, he walks past the secretaries. They don't mind him. And he goes in, and the desks are empty. Slothrop is elsewhere. Tantivy Mucker is elsewhere. His desk is perfectly neat. Everything's symmetrical. But when he looks at Slothrop's desk, as his name indicates, it's a total disaster. It's just a mess. And Pynchon goes through and lists here in one of his information overload paragraphs all the things on Slothrop's desk. But Bloat is particularly interested in a distribution map that is on the wall behind Slothrop's desk, which is a map. And it's, again, another rainbow because the stars are all different colors, silver stars that he's given to certain girls. These are all girls that he has had sexual liaisons with, and it forms a distribution map. And the map, as we'll see, actually moves from east to west with his conquests, which follows the distribution maps for the landing of the V2 missiles, which of course naturally there's more of them in the east because the east is closer to Europe, and then they dissipate in the western end of London. So that's what he's mainly concerned with. So he's using his little spy camera to click on the map. He's not sure about Slothrop. He's got doubts. So then that's episode 3. So then with episode 4 now, we have Slothrop going to visit the rocket that had brought incoming mail, the first opening episode that Pirate Prentice had seen coming in over the horizon before dawn, where it landed at Greenwich, which is longitude 0, at the Royal Observatory there, and there's a crater. Slothrop has been sent there. Achtung is sending Slothrop around to investigate these V2 landings, and he's standing there looking at the crater, and he sees Prentice show up, is a stranger to him, show up, this big burly guy apparently, and he grabs this graphite cylinder, and it's graphite because graphite is heat resistant. The fins of the V2 rocket are made from graphite, so they don't melt. So graphite cylinder, and inside of it is the message for him that he's supposed to get. So he comes, grabs it, and leaves. And Slothrop is standing there at the crater looking at it. And then he begins to, there's a bunch of flashes forwards and backwards in this chapter, which is quite a bit longer than episode 3. Slothrop thinking about the missile, and thinking about first how the V1 bombs, which started landing in June of 1944, the thing about them is that they're basically pilotless aircraft because they have wings. They look like jet planes. And they come in, and you can hear them. They're not faster than the speed of sound. So you had about, once you heard the sound coming across the sky, you had about 10 seconds to look for cover. And Slothrop was standing there thinking about how much, you could get used to that. After a while, it wasn't that bad. But then all of a sudden in September of 1944, the V2 missiles came, and they just hit, and you couldn't hear them coming in. And it really upsets him. He's standing there thinking about how much it upsets him. But then he's also thinking about his sexual conquests, especially the first two women, Norma and Marjorie, whom he did not want to meet. He didn't want them to know each other. And it was in September that he was with them at the time that the first V2 rocket came in and crashed into London. I think it only killed 3 people, the first strike. But then, of course, the Nazis kept sending them over, like 4 to 6 rockets per day, something like that. And then, so he's sitting there thinking about that, and he's thinking about how he has this sensitivity to things in the sky. And I'll read you this passage here. He describes, this is a beautiful paragraph. Pynchon sometimes is sloppy with his writings, and then sometimes he hits it, and it's beautiful. He describes the day that the first rocket came in September 1944, and what England was like. It was one of those great iron afternoons in London, the yellow sun being teased apart by 1,000 chimneys breathing, fawning upward without shame. The smoke is more than the day's breath, more than dark strength. It is an imperial presence that lives and moves. People were crossing the streets and squares, going everywhere. Buses were grinding off, hundreds of them, down the long concrete viaducts, smeared with years' pitiless use and no pleasure, into haze gray, grease-black, red lead, and pale aluminum between scrap heaps that towered high as blocks of flats, down side-shoving curves into roads clogged with army convoys, other tall buses and canvas lorries, bicycles and cars, everyone here with different destinations and beginnings, all flowing, hitching now and then over it all, the enormous gas ruin of the sun among the smokestacks, the barrage balloons, power lines, and chimneys brown as aging indoor wood, brown growing deeper, approaching black through an instant, perhaps the true turn of the sunset. That is wine to you, wine and comfort. So he's thinking about how beautiful the horizon looked during the sunset, and then he realizes when the rocket comes in, the moment was 6:43:16, British double summertime. The British apparently set their clocks forward 2 hours in the summer. The sky beaten like death's drum, still humming, and Slothrop's cock. Say what? Yes, look at inside his GI undershorts. Here's a sneaky hard-on stirring, ready to jump. Well, great God, where'd that come from? You can't understand why he's getting hard-ons when the missiles are coming in. There is in his history, and likely, God help him, in his dossier, a peculiar sensitivity to what is revealed in the sky. But a hard-on? And then we get this description of Slothrop's ancestors, and I think in many ways Slothrop is sort of Benny Profane from V Redux. He is a schlemiel, except that unlike Benny Profane, he's a chick magnet. He gets women. I don't know why Pynchon describes him as overweight, as this fat guy. I'm not sure what chicks see in him, but he's getting it. So, unlike Profane. But here, the ancestors of Slothrop are very clearly modeled on Pynchon's own ancestors, who were Puritans. In the 17th century, John Pynchon, William Pynchon, who were founders in Massachusetts, which firmly roots Thomas Pynchon in the New England consciousness structure. He's part of that world that descends from Hawthorne down through Melville and eventually to Stephen King. It's in H.P. Lovecraft. That's that world, and Pynchon belongs in that world. He's a northerner, in contrast to Cormac McCarthy, whom, as we have seen, is a true southerner. So once again, there's an opposition between the two of them, as there is in modernist days, between Hemingway, who was a northerner, and Faulkner, who was a total southerner. So here too we have the same opposition repeated between Pynchon and McCarthy as a New Englander and a southerner. And then so there's a description of this headstone on the old schist of a tombstone in the Congregational churchyard back home in Minboro, Massachusetts. On this tombstone appears the hand of God. The hand of God emerges from a cloud. Okay, so not a rocket. So this is something in Slothrop's genes, something in his history that predisposes him to have a sensitivity to things in the sky, which nowadays are machines. But back then with his Puritan ancestors were things like the hand of God coming out of a cloud, which then is one of the weight cards of the tarot deck, the Ace of Pentacles. If you look it up, you can see a cloud with the hand of God coming out of it. That same hand of God, by the way, appears in Stephen King's novel, The Stand, at the climax of the novel, when they're in Boulder and they're having the showdown between the forces of good and evil, and they look up and they see the hand of God coming down to them out of the clouds. It's the same image. It's a very puritanical New England type of an image, and it's on this headstone in memory of Constant Slothrop, who died March 4th, 1766, in the 29th year of his age. Death is a debt to nature due, which I have paid, and so must you. Constant was his name, and then his son is named Variable, the exact opposite of that which is constant. The son is Variable Slothrop. I'm not sure who would name their kid Variable, but it's a good joke. So we have these two proto-ancestors, which are modeled on, of course, Pynchon's own ancestors, John Pynchon and William Pynchon. But now the point of this passage, and it goes on for a couple of pages here, discussing Slothrop's ancestors, is that there is apparently a tendency toward dissolution. Maybe a curse. Pynchon's not real clear on it, but something has descended from the Puritans through the generations to Tyrone Slothrop as a tendency toward death, failure, and dissolution. That card, the Ace of Pentacles, on the one hand means prosperity, but on the other it means loss of opportunities, missed opportunities. And so he describes, Pynchon does, Slothrop's ancestors here, which is an interesting paragraph. He says, each one in turn paying his debt to nature due and leaving the excess to the next link in the name's chain. They began as fur traders, cordwainers, salters, and smokers of bacon, went on into glassmaking, became selectmen, builders of tanneries, quarriers of marble, undoubtedly marble for headstones. So they're basically middle-class people, the Slothrops are. Middle-class, they never leave the Berkshires. They're stuck in the region of the Berkshires, and they have no westward emigration drift or tendency in them. Country for miles around, gone to necropolis, gray with marble dust that was the breaths, the ghosts of all those fake Athenian monuments going up elsewhere across the Republic, always elsewhere. The money seeping its way out through stock portfolios more intricate than any genealogy. What stayed at home in Berkshire went into timberland, whose diminishing green reaches were converted acres at a clip into paper, toilet paper, banknote stock, newsprint, a medium or ground for shit, money, and the word. And so they eventually turn to deforestation because they figure out, the Slothrops do, a method for making paper. Paper up to this point had been made from rags. You take rags and you tear them apart, create a pulpy mesh out of it, and you create paper. Here they have figured out a way to do this, and this did happen. I don't know who came up with it, of shifting to wood to make paper, and then so the Slothrops begin devastating the New England countryside. Note that they are deforesting the New England countryside in order to make different kinds of paper. Toilet paper for shit, and then banknotes for money, and then newsprint for newspapers, the word, the logos coming through on these pieces of paper. Meanwhile, the family lineage is disintegrating, and Tyrone Slothrop then has inherited this tendency toward dissolution, death, and decay that his puritanical ancestors brought with them. And so Pynchon does suggest that there is somehow a family curse that Slothrop is bearing within him. There's going to be a very large philosophical debate in this novel about Slothrop's fate, about Dr. Pointsman, who's a strict causal determinist, and involves classical conditioning, will argue about Slothrop's actions being predetermined by classical conditioning. And if they are predetermined, then he has no free will. But then there's this other thing, the descent of the curse. And this is what Aeschylus discusses in the Oresteia, it's Oedipus, when he's doing Oedipus Rex, and he's talking about the descent of Oedipus. There's a family curse on him from one of the ancestors who has slain a dragon who is sacred. I think it's to Artemis, if I remember right. It's a sacred dragon that this ancestor slew, and it put a curse on the house of Oedipus. And so he was foreordained to be cursed to this terrible fate of sleeping with his mother and murdering his father. So Aeschylus gets into has a very complex philosophical discussion about whether Oedipus Rex does have a free will, or whether he was predetermined to do these things. And the same thing here with Tyrone Slothrop is going on with Pynchon, bringing in this idea of a family curse, which is so New England. If you pick up Hawthorne's novel, which was the first great work of literate highbrow fiction that I ever read in high school, The House of the Seven Gables, it is entirely concerned with the inheritance of a puritanical curse that ruins this house, the generations of this house. And so we see this here too. The same trait that we see in Hawthorne's House of the Seven Gables, we see it here in Pynchon. So you have to keep your eyes wide awake and open when you're reading him. Don't just skim through it. Be attentive to what he's saying to you, because it matters. This is a philosophical novel par excellence on the level of Thomas Mann's Magic Mountain, or Proust's Remembrance of Things Past, or Joyce's Ulysses. It's in that caliber of one of the great philosophical novels ever written, but you have to pay attention to it. You can't let things slip past you. Pynchon, with his new style in this book, that's very different, as I said, from V and Lot 49, is kind of hard to follow because the paragraphs are so swollen and overloaded and profuse with information, and he goes back and forth on his timelines, that it can be very difficult to keep track of what he's doing and what he's saying. So we'll stop there with episodes 3 and 4.